Okay, so here we are live with a second episode for today because, like I said, I got a lot of stuff to get through, so I might as well do a second bonus episode. Uh, this is Snake Eyes from the Super 7 G.I. Joe Reaction Plus series. Now, we talked the other day, last week, about Cobra Commander, and I was really happy with this figure, and in some ways, I felt like it was even a little bit superior to the original Cobra Commander figure back in the 80s. So, more because of the head sculpt than anything else. But while that might remain my nostalgic favorite, and I'm sure it's most people's nostalgic favorite, I did feel like this one actually improved on it on a technical level. So we're gonna see if I feel the same way about Snake Eyes. Now I'm gonna say something really controversial, and I'm sure I'm gonna lose a lot of you guys here. Hi, Aunt June. How you doing? I did two of them today, so there's a Joker episode that came before this one. You might want to check that out later. So, uh, okay, so the 1985 Snake Eyes figure. This is obviously based on the design that the 1985 Snake Eyes figure had. I don't think that figure was that great. Oh, okay, God, calm down, calm down, calm down. I know that's a lot of people's favorite Snake Eyes figure, especially out of the vintage line. I know that a lot of you consider that to be the definitive look of the character, and I'm not going to argue with you as far as like the design of the figure goes, but the execution of the 1989 figure I feel like was a little lacking. The head was a little oversized and kind of weirdly peanut shaped, and he had like lips sculpted onto the mask, which everybody who complains about the lips sculpted onto the mask in the movie G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra, well, that's where they got it from. So I don't know what you're so upset at. Your favorite Snake Eyes figure, it came directly from that. And the figure itself, like the physique of the character was kind of doughy and ill-defined and looked kind of paunchy. I don't know. It's like I think that people like the design of that character. And if you were buying G.I. Joe figures at the height of their popularity in 1985, that's the one that was on the shelf. And that was the one that was used, the design that was used throughout most of the cartoon series. It was used for a lot of the best issues of the comic book. You know, it's one that, like, the design, I love the design. I do feel like that's kind of the most distinct, recognizable design for Snake Eyes. I know a lot of people like the I can't talk, the commando look, and the commando look is cool, no doubt, but it is a little more sort of like real world, and thus it's a little less unique. Whereas the visor look, I kind of feel like it's like nobody really has a mask like that. Snake Eyes is the only person I can think of that has a visor mask like that. So that's why I kind of feel like it's a little bit more unique, and I can see why it became kind of the definitive look of the character after a while. Now, that having been said, that kind of puts me in a weird spot where even though I don't really particularly care for that figure, I do like its design. And thankfully, since the 1980s, we've had a lot of different versions of Snake Eyes that kind of pick up on that design with the visored faceplate and run with it in different directions. There's been three different designs for Snake Eyes, at least in the live action movies. All of them have taken from it. Most of the animated versions of Snake Eyes since taken from it. It's kind of become the definitive look for the character. So that brings us to this guy, which is something that I was hoping that they would have done like back in 2000 or so, which is to kind of go back to this character and revisit him in the O-ring format. And I know that you know the Joe versus Cobra and Spy Troops and Valor versus Venom, like that era. They had plenty of the visored Snake Eyes figures too, and they were pretty cool. But that is, I kind of feel like a slightly different format than a pure 1980s style O-ring figure, and that's basically what we have here. So it says Snake Eyes Commando. It lists its accessories as includes sword, backpack, and SMG. They don't refer to it as an Uzi. if we look at, we'll get a closer look at it later, but it's not quite an Uzi. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It doesn't say on the front, but on the back in the cross-sell artwork, it does identify this as Snake Eyes comic. And I had no idea Snake Eyes was a stand-up comic. That's news to me. So it's got to be really difficult to be a stand-up comic when you can't talk. You got to depend on your audience to know sign language. Either that, or you just kind of like have to do your stand-up in charades, and that's awkward. But I think it actually means the comic book is what it actually means. So yeah, it says it's color that it's designed to look like the comic book version, but I'm going to get into that in a little bit. First, we'll have a look at the cross-sell artwork, which we already saw in Cobra Commander, but here we have the Cobra Bat comic, Cobra TM Commander, Cover Girl TM, not Cover TM Girl TM, and Snake Eyes TM comic. Snake Eyes is not spelt with a hyphen on this package. Sometimes they spell it with a hyphen, sometimes they don't. I prefer to spell it with a hyphen. That's just me. It says collect G.I. Joe weapons, figures, and Cobra Command, the enemy army. And then we've got a full file card, which I believe should be the same text from the original 1980s Snake Eyes. Oh yeah, the other thing I think that made this such a standout figure in a lot of kids' minds was this is the first Snake Eyes that came with a sword, and it came with Timber, his wolf companion. I'm not going to refer to him as a pet this time because a friend of mine from Facebook, Dino, he came on here and he's like, Timber is not his pet. I'm like, I know, but we'll say animal companion. I think that is, but unfortunately, this does not come with Timber, not even a non-posable slug of him. But maybe we'll get Timber later on in the line. Who knows? So let's go ahead and look at the file card. That's what the file card looks like. It says Snake Eyes, Commando, file name, classified. I think everybody has their own idea as to what Snake Eyes' real name is. I know I do, but I'm not going to say what it is. Primary military specialty infantry, secondary military specialty hand-to-hand combat instructor, grade E5, birthplace, classified. I like to think it's somewhere in the South, though, since most soldiers come from the South. Snake Eyes is proficient in 12 different unarmed fighting systems, karate, kung fu, jujitsu, and is highly skilled in the use of edged weapons. He has received extensive training in mountaineering, undercover demolitions, jungle, desert, and Arctic survival, and some forms of holistic medicine. Qualified expert, all NATO and Warsaw Pact small arms. The man is a total mystery, but he's real good at his job. Heck, he's the best. So that's pretty cool. Okay, Daniel Evans says, he gives us a little Bible verse here. I'll go ahead and read it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. I'm not like this is not the place to come for. I'm not somebody to give out religious. I say that with all humility. I'm not the guy. I'm a guy who opens action figures on the internet. But I think if there's one thing that people of every religion can agree on, it's that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself, and that's a good message to give to anybody. And of course, judge not lest ye be judged is something else that I like to go by. I'm a very live and let live kind of guy. So that is definitely it's not church, but but that's something that I can get behind that. So no matter what religion you are, we should all treat each other. We should all treat each other with kindness and love. I think we can agree on that, right? So again, I'm not the guy. I'm not that guy. I'm not the guy to turn to for any kind of religious advice. I'm not any kind of expert. I'm not a pope or a priest or a rabbi or a preacher or an imam or anything like that. I'm just a guy who opens action figures on the internet. But we can all treat each other with kindness and respect, right? That's absolutely something that we should do. Let's get back to the action figure. All right, so The artwork is quite nice, and it's not artwork that's based on any of the '80s GI Joe figures, but it does evoke that look. Got the nice explosion behind it. Yeah, Snake Eyes is cool. I love Snake Eyes. He's one of my favorite GI Joe characters. So I don't know if he's like my absolute favorite of the GI Joe team, but he's up there. I like Snake Eyes. I like Scarlet. I like Roadblock. I like Flint. I like Stalker. I like Lady J. I like Shockwave an awful lot. Shockwave's one of my favorites. He's like, since he came in later, he's not in any of the cartoons or anything, I don't think. I think he might have been the DIC cartoon, but Deke. But I like that character. So anyway, let's go ahead and open them up. So it says that it's the comic version of Snake Eyes, and I've got some issues with saying that this is specifically the comic version of Snake Eyes. I'm going to get into that in a second. But I kind of feel like if you were going to do a true comic book version of Snake Eyes, the way he was colored in the comic book is oh, Aunt June says bye, everyone. Thanks for watching, though. You can watch the rest later. It's fine. So I'm always glad to see you. So you have a good nap. I'm probably going to take a nap once I'm done with this myself. So he's got two accessories. One is the submachine gun. We'll get back to that in a minute. And the other is the sword. And one thing that I'm a little disappointed with in this sword is usually when they do the 1985 version of the Snake Eyes sword, it does have like an eagle head pommel. And I really like that. And this is just kind of a generic round pommel. So that's a little disappointing. But other than that, it doesn't look too bad of a sword. It does have like a little bit less of that sort of scimitar look to it. And it looks a little more like a standard ninja sword, but it's a little thicker towards the top than it is down towards the hilt. So it's kind of a somewhere in between. It does have like almost kind of a slight sort of angle here, but it's so slight it's barely noticeable, unless I'm just imagining it. And then Snake Eyes already has his backpack on his back out of the package, but of course it just popped right off when I'm taking him out of the package. So he's got it's this kind of purplish blue backpack, and we can see that it does have like a little space for the sword to go, and it just kind of plugs into his back like so. So Snake Eyes color scheme on this is he's wearing a very dark gray bodysuit with a balaclava. He's got the gray knight's visor type eyepiece over his head, and like that '85 figure, he does have the little wrist rocket thing on one wrist, and over here on this other wrist, he has a watch, and then he's got these pouches strapped to his biceps. He's got gray web gear with a gray web belt, and then a gray pistol and holster sculpted into one leg, a gray knife sculpted into the other leg, and then he's got blue pouches strapped about his ankles and blue boots. Now, in the original figure, this is not supposed to be like a solid boot like it looks like here. It's supposed to be like he's got like black boots with the strap around it. And I think they were black straps and pouches in the original figure, but I could be mistaken about that. So so this color scheme, it's a good color scheme for Snake Eyes, I think. You know, with the dark gray and the light gray and the blue, these are colors that are traditionally associated with the character, but I don't really feel like it's that accurate of a comic book Snake Eyes, because in the comic book he would have been wearing a black bodysuit with gray web gear, and that's pretty much it. All this stuff would have, although it's blue that you see is blue, would have been gray except for the feet, which would have been black. And, you know, it was colored in a blue highlight, so I suppose you could have done it as dark blue, but then that one would have looked more like the cartoon version, wouldn't it? Daniel Evans says, I welded my figure's joints together with a magnifying glass and used fireworks in a fantastic end scene. The fate of far too many of our vintage G.I. Joe figures. So I kind of feel like it's one of those things where like if they'd have done them in blue, it would have been too close to the animated version, and if they'd done them in the black and gray, it would have just been like an homage straight up to the original toy. So they probably tried to compromise in such a way where they felt like it was a little more a little more like evocative of the comic book, but it's not exactly a one translation of what he looked like in the comic book. So swing and a miss as far as that was concerned. But to me, it's a nice enough looking figure that I don't really mind so much that they take some liberties as far as that goes. So let's. I'm going to take the backpack off again, and it does fit nice and snugly on there, by the way. We're going to talk about his articulation. So Snake Eyes is articulated like a 1984 and earlier of the vintage line, where he doesn't have the head that nods up and down. The head just turns back and forth, and it doesn't go all the way around. It's got a stopper that keeps it from going all the way around, just like the early figures had. Of course, the arms go up at the shoulder about that far, rest at the side about that far. The arms rotate all the way around at the shoulder. He's got an elbow that bends about 90 degrees. He does have the swivel arm battle grip, so that rotates all the way around. Thankfully, both the elbows seem pretty tight on this guy, unlike Cobra Commander, who had that one loose elbow. He's got the O-ring articulation, which enables a good range of motion at the waist. Legs can move up about that far, so about 90 degrees, but it does seem like the rubber band, the O-ring, is wanting to pull it a little too tight there. And then the knee bends about 90 degrees. So that's about the articulation scheme that we get on this guy. Let's go ahead and put his backpack back on, and then we can talk about his other accessories. So the backpack, it does look a little plain. It's just a normal backpack. It doesn't have anything on it as far as like, canteens or a radio or any of that kind of stuff like you often see on these G.I. Joe figures. It's just got the little slot. We can put the sword in there and a couple of pouches at the side. So let's go ahead and put the sword in there so we can see what that looks like. And the sword just kind of sticks out the bottom of the backpack. There's not like an actual space for it to go through there, but it does seem to stay in there fairly well. So that's how the sword is stored. How we store our sword. Swore our sword. I don't know. And then the submachine gun fits very easily into his hand. No place to store that, but that's par for course as far as like 80s style G.I. Joe figures. I do want to talk a little bit about this submachine gun. So both of these are molded in a gray plastic. The original, of course, they would have been molded in that sort of off black, kind of dark gray kind of color, but these are a very light gray. And while this is, you can tell by looking at it that it's based on an Uzi, but it's not exactly an Uzi. And I've mentioned before, I'm not a firearms expert, so I don't know 100% about all this. But to me, the main difference is it looks to me like the pistol grip on the gun is slightly further back on the gun than you would see on an actual Uzi. And then you can see it's kind of slung backwards. It doesn't go straight up and down like an Uzi tends to do. It's got like a little bit of a where it slopes back this way. And I think that was probably done for a couple of reasons. One, they probably didn't want to do an exact reproduction of an Uzi for like copyright reasons. Like they don't want to get sued by the manufacturers of Uzis. So they do it slightly different. So and the other thing is, like, I noticed this a lot of the times with the Uzis on the Snake Eyes figures when I was a kid, is that because the handle was so straight up and down, it would tend to, when you put it into the hand, make the Uzi point down slightly. But you can see that when this submachine gun is in his hand, it points directly forward. So that's good. That's nice. All right, so then we got the sword, so we can put that into his other hand. Now, as I noted on Cobra Commander before, these are much more like the original 80s G.I. Joes than later O-ring figures that Hasbro would make, and that usually they would make the forearm out of a more pliable sort of plastic from 1997 and on. so that way you didn't have to worry so much about broken thumbs. But these are very much in the style of the 1980s, so they are that rigid sort of plastic. And I should point out that the thumbs on these, to my eye at least, look a bit more narrow. They're a bit thinner than the thumbs that our 1980s figures had. So be really careful when you're putting these accessories into their hands. And it seems like the sword fits in there a little more loosely than the Uzi. I think I got it in there tight. I think the trick is you gotta have it pulled all the way down in the hand, have the hilt actually resting on his fingers. But that's what he looks like with when he's all geared up with the backpack and the sword and the Uzi. Very cool. I like the sculpt of this figure. Like I said, I had my issues with the way that the figure was sculpted in the 80s, but I kind of feel like this one has a much better head sculpt. The head does seem to me to still be like a little on the larger side. Like I think his head is about the same size as Cobra Commander's helmet, but it's still, I think, better than the 85 sculpt. It doesn't have lips, at least, and it does have the night visor and a lot of good detail on this figure. Not as good as we think of the 80s figures as being, but it still has, I think, more detail than Cobra Commander had. And again, this is a figure that's intended to have very much of an animated sort of look. So he's not necessarily with the 80s GI Joes. I think they were going for more of a realism, and especially once they got to 85, like I think that was when they'd hit peak realism in terms of like the details of the sculpt and everything like that. Very cool. But this one seems almost more like the early 80s figures, where they were still a little bit more simple. And like I said, it's very much of an animated sort of look. I'm going to try to put the sword in the other hand and see if he holds it any more tightly in the other hand. Although I doubt that's going to be the case. I'm just going to try it anyway. So, yeah, the sword is just he's just gonna grip it kind of loosely. That's just how that's gonna be. So I don't think it's gonna fall out too easily when you're playing with it, if a kid was playing with it, but it's not gonna stay in there as tightly as the Uzi is gonna stay in his hand. So, like I said, if I had a piece of constructive criticism for the team at Super 7 as far as this goes, I would tell them to thicken up those thumbs so they don't break, and maybe make them out of the more pliable sort of plastic, so we don't have to worry about our thumbs breaking on our figures. So that would be nice. But all in all, I think this is a really great. It's not a reproduction of the 80s figure by any means, but it's a really great, 1980s style GI Joe figure. Just kind of like like I said, they're trying to go for a little bit more of an animated look. It's supposed to be like a Sunbow homage as far as the sculpt goes. So I think as far as that goes, it's perfect. And like I said, I like it better even than the 1985 sculpt, because he's got a little bit more definition at the abs. He doesn't have that sort of paunchiness like I was talking about the 85 figure seemed to have to me. Better head sculpt, better body sculpt. Maybe not quite as much on the detail as far as the gear on the figure goes, but it's a bit of a trade-off. I'm really happy with this figure. I'm glad with how he turned out. I'm definitely going to be buying more of these reaction figures in the future. I know I had seen CoverGirl on both Big Bad Toy Store and Amazon, so I'll probably be getting one of those fairly soon, so keep an eye out for her. But the Bat's the one that seems to sell out the most, and I think that's because G.I. Joe fans are obviously crazy for army builders, but for the prices these figures are, I can't see me spending too much on that. Mission Fleet. I'm not familiar with Mission Fleet. Is that one of those new retro O-ring type lines? I'll have to check those out. So I know there's been a bunch of different O-ring type lines coming out here recently, and I probably would like to have some, at least check them out and see how they are. I know Marauder had like an O-ring figure that they came out with recently. So, but yeah, I'll check out Mission Fleet. Star Wars. Oh, okay. Yeah, like I collected the old 80s Star Wars figures. Well, I guess 70s Star Wars figures, but I collected them in the 80s. So I'm used to them being the 5-point of articulation. But if they made some G.I. Joe type Star Wars figures, I'd go nuts for those. Like old trilogy or prequel trilogy, either one. More the old trilogy, but the original ones. But anyway, that's pretty much it for Snake Eyes. I've got a lot more G.I. Joe stuff to open this week, so I've got a lot more classified figures that I got the Mad Marauders, Low Light and Spirit 2-pack. I got the Gray Camo, Storm Shadow, looking forward to that. Got the Night Creeper, got Sergeant Slaughter. So there's those. I think maybe tomorrow I'll do Sergeant Slaughter and do the 2-pack after that, and then we can have all of our Mad Marauders together because I already have Barbecue. I've had Barbecue for like a year now. He's been waiting on more people to join his sub team. So anyway, that's pretty much it for Snake Eyes. Definitely get to recommend, especially if you love the old vintage O-ring figures. Pretty cool stuff. But that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you like, subscribe, all the fun YouTube stuff down below. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Snake Eyes, both this figure and the character in general. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye.